The views expressed on this program are those of the producers and individuals appearing on this program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Sun Prairie Media Center staff, its video service providers, or the staff and elected officials of the City of Sun Prairie.
Hello and welcome to Real Reviews. My name is Jamison Rabbit, and this week I'm so happy to be joined by the man of exemplary talents. It's Steve Sabaki. Welcome back.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here. 3 movies in the theater in the last few days. I have eaten a lot of popcorn. Wow.
A diet consisting solely of popcorn. That's good.
But you know, popcorn, it's part of the vegetable group.
That's right.
Yeah, so I'm good.
That's what I convince myself of all the time.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's great. We actually have a bunch of movies in theaters, which is exciting. And we're going to get to talk about all the films that are on the marquee this week. And I'm going to get us started with what we have first. It is a film called Uncharted. This is a film that is based on the highly successful video game franchise of the same name, which usually spells doom if you know anything about video games to film transfers. It's a rocky road through there. This is directed by Ruben Fleischer. It stars Tom Holland as Nathan Drake. He is the star of this franchise. Nathan Drake is a pickpocket, a con man who has a deep knowledge of history and treasure thanks to his older brother who got him hooked on adventure before disappearing when Drake was a child. Sully, played by Mark Wahlberg, is a fellow con man who is in search of Magellan's gold, who knew Drake's brother and comes looking to the younger one to help him solve the puzzle, to hopefully find these keys that unlock the treasure they must acquire. Because it is a video game, you got to always acquire some keys to unlock some rooms.
I guess.
To unlock the adventure and even more clues. They also enlist the help of Chloe, played by Sophia Ali, who is another untrustworthy grifter who has one of the keys and has a history with Sully. They engage in lots of parkour and chasing each other around, and there's constant backstabbing throughout, and they have to deal with Moncada, who is our villain, played by Antonio Banderas, who is this ultra-rich guy who is also looking for the fortune because he feels he deserves it. It's his family's birthright for this fortune, and he employs our other villain, Braddock, played by Tati Gabrielle. She is a mercenary who also has a history with Sully. We're all tied together in this franchise. And so it's a film that's filled with people who distrust each other, and as they wander through booby traps and old churches to track down this treasure trove. You see in the trailer here if you're watching, it opens with a big action sequence that is kind of actually in the middle of the movie. We open to it and then cut to flashbacks. One of my favorite things. And it's a film that kind of borrows really heavily from Indiana Jones and all of the adventure. I mean, in fact, and there's one scene where Tom Holland's character, they go into a church and he says, nuns. Why has it always got to be nuns? I was like, oh, we're just basically ripping off Raiders of the Lost Ark with this.
Yeah, I mean, Indiana Jones obviously is the gold standard.
Yes.
And this is no Indiana Jones. I'm sorry. I've reviewed a number of different action movies now that I've been on this show, and I think I've disliked them all. And, some of the things I didn't like about this, I hate to be negative, but I mean, Tom Holland's okay. I understand he's the actor right now.
Yeah.
I think he's better as Spider-Man.
Sure.
But if the movie's trying to make him out to be a hero, which I think it is,
yeah.
Why is he stealing from his customers when he bartends?
We meet him as a real
The guy's
grifter.
a thief.
Yeah.
I didn't think there was any chemistry at all between him and Wahlberg.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing. And I'm not a fan. I'm not a video game guy anymore.
No, I'm not either.
But I talked to a couple of my friends who this is one of their favorite franchises.
Really?
And there's a lot of consternation because the character of Sully is supposed to be a man in his late 50s, early 60s who's been a mentor to Drake since he was a child. And instead they got Mark Wahlberg being Mark Wahlberg. And Drake is supposed to be like in his 30s. And I mean, Tom Holland looks like he's about 19 years old.
Yeah, he looks really young in this. I mean, the Chloe Fraser character that was played by Sophia Ali, I actually think she's one of the more interesting characters in the film. And then she disappears in the last half hour of the film. And so this is a movie where the men pretty much prevail and the women characters do not.
Mm-hmm.
I love Antonio Banderas. I think he's great as a villain, but he's wasted in this.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's very
and,
one note.
You know, maybe I'm being picky. I'm not a big fan of blatant product placement there, but there's a scene where Mark Wahlberg gets into a fight and it's in a Papa John's.
Yeah.
Nothing against Papa John's, but you know, come on. And you know, and we saw it in the trailer. The next time there's a scene in the movie where somebody is bouncing around, free falling in the sky and bouncing from one object to another without a parachute, I want a note scrawled at the bottom of the screen from an aerodynamics engineer telling me that either is or is not humanly possible.
Sure. I mean, if I see Tom Cruise do it, I know it's really happening.
Yeah, it is. Okay, but maybe, you know, Tom Holland, and this kind of moves like a video game.
Yeah.
They're searching for a clue, and they're searching and searching. Oh, we
go
found
talk to
that
this
clue.
guy. Yeah.
And then
unlock this
they're
door.
searching for another clue, and they go to the book that they have, and oh, hey, we found this one. And everything seemed to be kind of too easy in finding this stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess this movie, from what I read, has been 14 years in the making.
They've been working on it for so long. In fact, at one point, Mark Wahlberg was signed on to be the younger character.
Yeah.
And Robert De Niro was supposed to be Sully, the aged mentor. And then when they finally get it going, they tell Mark Wahlberg, we're good to go. And he's like, cool, who's going to be my partner? They're like, Tom Holland. He goes, well, he's pretty young. Like, yeah, because you're Sully now.
Well, I guess the original director was supposed to be David O. Russell, who did Silver Linings Playbook.
Because it was supposed to be right after The Fighter.
And American
When they had
Hustle.
done that, when Wahlberg and Russell had done The Fighter, they were going to come right out with this.
And that would have made for an interesting film. I think, you know, I would have liked how he did it. But, you know, I'm not a big video game player. I think the last video game I played was Pong. So I'm waiting for the movie version of Pong. I'm thinking that would be a much better film.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mark Wahlberg is just playing Mark Wahlberg in this movie.
Yeah, he is.
My biggest thing is with these movies is give me an interesting villain. And I thought the villains were lackluster. I thought Antonio Banderas was one note.
Yeah.
And Braddock was just a mercenary. I thought she didn't have a motivation that really intrigued me. And so if I think that Sully's kind of blah and Antonio Banderas just has his one thing, and he's really not in the movie a ton.
No, I mean, I don't think he was given a lot to go with to begin with.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I want an interesting villain, especially when all of my heroes are constantly backstabbing each other.
Yeah.
Give me an interesting villain in here. And for me, it just felt like a standard, now another video game franchise, the Tomb Raider, which is a precursor to this in movie form. Same thing, we got to go levels, unlock things, we're looking for treasure. This felt like one of the lesser Tomb Raider scripts that I've seen. And I think Tom Holland is enjoyable enough. I like Tom Holland on screen. I haven't loved everything he's done. I think he's enjoyable enough. And for what this film was promised to be, how long it's been in development, I was hoping for a lot more. And it felt kind of like a studio that took something and decided that instead of making... From what my discussions I've had about the game franchise of Uncharted is it's kind of groundbreaking and it's very cinematic as far as how it's played.
Yeah.
And it felt to me like the studio just kind of decided, well, let's just kind of make something we've already seen on screen. Let's just kind of make it a Tomb Raider movie or a watered down Indiana Jones movie.
I mean, there's nothing new here, and there looks like there's going to be a sequel from the way they.
I think it will. I think we'll definitely get a sequel.
Threw some scenes into the credits. Which I almost missed as I was walking out the door.
Oh no! All right, well, what did you end up giving Uncharted?
I gave it 2 stars. For me, Uncharted was unoriginal.
I don't disagree.
You know,
I don't disagree.
I'd rather play the video game, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's flawed, and there's a laughable moment in the climax of the film with one of the henchmen that made me laugh out loud, where he appears in 2 places at once, and I was like, "Oh, the editor didn't catch this." He's both on the ground and in the helicopter at the same time. Interesting, yeah.
Wow, I didn't get that at one at all.
The Scottish guy appears on the boat and in the helicopter at the same time.
Oh, jeez. Now I'm gonna have to watch it again.
No, you don't. I think it delivered a fine, regular old treasure hunting adventure. Nothing special, and I ended up giving it 3 stars.
Oh,
Mostly
okay.
Tom Holland's enjoyable, but
Yeah.
it's fine. It's not great. But what do we have next on the marquee for you?
All right, up next, it's another movie playing in theaters. It is called Dog, and it's directed by Reed Carolyn and Channing Tatum. It's the first time directing for both of them. And Channing Tatum plays former Army Ranger Jackson Briggs, who right now is working in a sub sandwich shop, and he wants to get back into some type of active duty, but he can't because he suffered a brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder from his service. So he's finally given an opportunity to get back in, but he has to take on a mission. And that mission is to transport a former military working dog, a Belgian Malinois named Lulu, has to transport her from the state of Washington to Arizona to attend the funeral of the dog's handler, who was a member of Briggs's unit. The family wants the dog to be there. However, the pair cannot travel by air. Lulu needs to travel all that distance by car. She has some post-war traumatic issues of her own. In fact, Briggs is given a binder. It's sort of a do's and don't handbook about Lulu that includes showing her a DVD of old Grey's Anatomy episodes to calm her down when she gets excited. So the trailer that we're watching right now that's on the screen, I think the trailer for this film is a bit deceiving in that it gives you the impression that this is a funny, goofy, Turner and Hutch man-dog on-the-road comedy. In my opinion, it's not. Now, there are moments of that. I mean, there's times when the two drive each other completely crazy. There's that obligatory scene where the dog tears the car apart. Briggs wants to have some fun along the way, and the dog is not going to have any of that. There's even a scene where Briggs fakes being blind in order to get a nice hotel room, because apparently Lulu needs to sleep. There it is. See how I timed that? In order to get a nice hotel room, because apparently Lulu likes to sleep in a really nice bed. And I mean, how many times have we seen that scene before? I thought that was completely unnecessary. But, there's also a very serious side to this movie, too, in that you have two former members of the military. Their lives are each being impacted by some form of post-war trauma. In fact, I read where many of these former military service dogs, they can't be placed into a regular home after they serve because of the issues that they have, and unfortunately, they end up being euthanized. And that theme is a prevalent storyline in the film. It's not just those goofy moments between man and dog, and I think the directors, Carolyn and Channing Tatum, I think they do a pretty decent job of balancing that serious side with the lighter elements of the movie. I mean, they could have made a movie that was really heavy on the serious part of the story, where you have these two broken souls, and is a bond going to form between the two of them on this road trip? I mean, it's there, but I felt it wasn't really in your face there.
Yeah, it was kind of slowly introduced, because I was expecting this to be more Turner and Hooch than The Last Detail, and we got a lot of that.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison. For those that's watched saw The Last Detail.
Two warriors who are suffering and at odds with each other, and we're taking them along, and I appreciated what they were doing with it. First off, this is like the 7th or 8th movie where Channing Tatum plays a soldier. I feel like he just really wants to be seen as that. But
I mean, he doesn't really go a lot beyond his wheelhouse in this one.
But
he's
the
good.
way they introduce that, both of these, Lulu and Jackson Briggs, don't realize that they're liabilities to each other, and he's focused on, I just have to get this dog delivered so I can get back into as a ranger.
Yep.
And that's his singular focus, and it takes so long for them to realize really what this journey that they're on, and where they cross paths with all these people, and how wounded both of them are, their psyche. And then halfway into the film, we also find out that Jackson isn't alone, that he has a young daughter that he can't really see.
Yep.
And we just kind of touch on that, but it kind of introduces a little more into the pain that's in his life, and how alone he feels because he can't really see her. It was a weird mix, though, for me, of the slapstick of like the blind scene and all that, in mixed with serious traumatic underpinnings. It was a strange mix, and I thought that they did a pretty good job. They didn't go really melodramatic with it.
They could have.
They could have. I mean, there's a great moment towards the end in a rainstorm that I thought was a beautiful moment, and that was about as big as they went. But it all felt kind of authentic to me, and I was surprised by it. I was expecting something much sillier.
Yeah, I mean, they could have made this movie into a real tearjerker.
Yeah, I've seen enough dog movies to make you cry.
I mean,
though.
you know, when I was going to see this, I asked my wife, "Do you want to go see this?" And she said, "With you at a dog movie? No way."
You had texted me when you said we were going to do dog. You said, "I'm going to be a blubbering mess in this movie."
Yeah, so I mean, it's not a real tearjerker, but fair warning. I mean, there are some moments in the film that could open up the tear ducts.
Mm-hmm.
They did for me,
Yeah.
and I think some people that were sitting near me thought I was, you know, having a seizure, but
trying to hold it in.
yeah. So you may be reaching for the tissues in the last 30 minutes of the film. But they do hold back on that, and they do, like I said. I mean, I think it's a nice balance. Channing Tatum, I think, is very believable in this role. The dog was actually played by 3 different dogs.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah, I think the dog is very good.
And I think Channing Tatum did a great job as both the director and the star of this movie. He kind of humbled himself in this role and didn't make it all about him. It was more about his journey to learn from Lulu and how important that was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's tough, especially because, you know, I don't think Channing Tatum's like a phenomenal actor with a huge range. And so I thought it was great that he kind of humbled his character. We saw how broken he was at points, and kind of made this more of the dog's journey to help each other heal. It was enjoyable.
I mean, he does show his tender side, which
Yeah.
I don't think we've really seen before.
I've seen other sides of Channing Tatum in too many movies that I didn't need. Speaking of which, a little cameo from Kevin Nash in here, a little Magic Mike reunion between the two of them. He was the stoner farmer, the pot farmer.
Was he in Magic Mike?
He was one of the stars of Magic Mike. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Boy, I've seen that one.
You know, when I saw the movie, there was a mother who brought her young kids to see it.
Yeah,
I mean,
why not?
this is my opinion. I mean, I don't think it's a kids movie.
Yeah.
I mean, it is rated PG-13, but I didn't think, you know, for younger kids, you know, you may want to rethink about it. But
Yeah.
you know, it's just.
I agree. What did you end up giving Dog?
You know, I gave it 3 stars. I thought the comedy was uneven. There's some good parts of that, some not. I was more interested in the dramatic parts and the relationship that evolved between these 2 lead characters, and I just thought it was a little better than average.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I gave it 3 stars as well.
Okay.
I was pleasantly surprised by it. I was expecting it to kind of be humdrum, and I found myself enjoying it more than I expected. So, but yeah, I would say maybe not for the kids.
Yeah.
The final movie we have on the marquee this week is a film that comes to us from Norway. It is called The Worst Person in the World. This is from director Joachim Trier. Stars Renate Reinsby. All of these Norwegian names. Renate Reinsby plays Julie. This film is about 4 years in the life of Julie as she travels through the tumultuous quest for love and figuring out who she is. It's a film that's broken up into a prologue, 12 chapters, and then an epilogue. And I think that's a really interesting way of telling this story. And it's kind of the opposite of a rom-com. Julie is a young woman who early on drops out of medical school, dumps her boyfriend, chases her passion to become a photographer. But as we find out, she's kind of restless and moves on to the next thing frequently. And that's not just with her career. She gets bored easily and tends to jump to the next thing. We pick up with her. She's now with Axel, and she has this complicated relationship with her father, and it doesn't take a psych major to see how that reverberates in her life. And while she is with Axel, she meets another man, Elvin, at a party. And in an interesting use of this chapter device, she spends basically an entire chapter of this movie seeing how intimate she and Elvin can be without technically cheating. And the intimacy gets pretty interesting, but we're not technically cheating. And then there's another chapter where it's basically a freeze frame through the entire chapter where she goes out and cheats in her mind with this guy, and kind of raises a question, at least to me, like, is it cheating if everyone else in the world is frozen?
Yeah.
There's no chance of being caught. And as the chapters move along, we see her chase love, and she's really only concerned about herself. And so she kind of turns on those who care about her as she kind of chases her whims. I think that what really intrigued me about this movie was just the use of these chapters and how they weren't symmetrical. Some of them could be just mere minutes long, and you could choose different ways of telling it. There's one chapter that's basically an entire mushroom trip that doesn't end well.
Yeah.
That gets a little crazy. Some of these are just mere minutes long. There's one chapter where there's an argument over woke culture where she doesn't really even talk the entire chapter. And some of these are like really tough personal things, and then the next chapter cuts to, and it's something really flighty, and it seems kind of thrown off. But I loved the technique that was used in here, and I loved, by the way, the soundtrack of this movie. Top to bottom, I thought was really fun. It was one of the first notes I wrote in as I was watching. I was like, "Oh, the soundtrack is incredible."
Yeah.
And then I come out and see, "Oh, it's nominated for best soundtrack." Oh, that's good. Or no, it isn't. It's best original screenplay.
Best original screenplay, and I think it's also nominated for best international feature film.
Yes.
I like that the movie was divided up into those segments.
Yeah.
I think it helped to move the story along. That being said, there were some chapters that worked more than others.
Yeah.
I mean, the one with the mushrooms, I didn't think really worked at all for me, but
Yeah. Yep.
you know, I mean, that was one of the chapters. You know, to me, this movie lives or dies on the performance of one individual, and that is Julie, played by Renata Reinsva.
Go for it.
She is fantastic.
She really is.
She won the award for Best Actress at last year's Cannes Film Festival. And, you know, I was going to say that the snub of the year at this year's Oscars was going to be Lady Gaga for not being nominated for House of Gucci. And I've changed my mind.
Yeah.
I think the snub of the year is this actress, you know.
And this movie was written for her.
Oh, yeah.
Trier wrote this movie with her in mind.
I mean, she's in almost every scene of the film.
Yeah.
And I've never seen her before. And I think I read where this film is part of a trilogy, so I don't know if the other two films that came before it are related or if she's in it. But, I mean, she's portraying what I believe, at least in my mind, is a pretty complex character.
Yes.
Because it's about
She can be very frustrating.
Right. It's about 4 years of her life, and the choices that she makes. This is like the late 20s through the early 30s, and then what consequences can come from making those choices, both good and bad. And she is so good at portraying all the different emotions that come after making the choices that she does make. You know, changes her major at school, changes her profession, changes her relationships. And there's some negative consequences of those, making those changes that come much later in the film. There's some twists that I didn't expect that did surprise me. And you talked about visiting her father. There's one scene where she does visit her father. Her father's estranged. And she asked him if he read an article that she sent to him, and he said, no, I couldn't open the link to it. And then it was her birthday, and her father gave her a jacket for her birthday, and then either the father's daughter or stepdaughter comes into the room, and this is from another marriage, and she's wearing the exact same jacket. And you could just see the pain and the hurt that's emanating from Julie's face. You know, here she is trying to establish a reconnection with this guy, and she's not able to. And I mean, I just kept thinking of that performance after the movie was over. I just thought it was such a great performance. I mean, had it not been like that, this movie really could have, you know, died for me. I mean, I saw, as we were watching the trailer, one of the critics, big headline that says, hilarious. I mean, there are some funny moments. I didn't think it was hilarious.
No. One of the only drawback for me with this movie, and it might be a pet peeve of mine, there's a narrator that pops up throughout the movie, and that always irks me.
I know you don't like that.
It always irks me because it feels like a shortcut to to getting from one thing to the next or for delivering information is we'll just have a voiceover. And that always irritates me. And the epilogue, I don't think the epilogue was my favorite part of this movie. I thought the epilogue was kind of one of the weaker parts for me.
Yeah, but there's something that happens in the epilogue that where, again, this was the choice that she made, and then you see what happens as a result of that.
It felt a little too much of a Twilight Zone ending to me.
Really?
It
Okay.
did, kind of.
Yeah,
It kind of did. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. Her performance was spot on and had me twisting because I think the title, The Worst Person in the World, you go in thinking, okay, this is going to be about her. She must be the worst person in the world. And you go in looking for that. And I found myself kind of changing allegiances as the film went along. Like, okay, I like her. She's, okay, I can understand where she's coming from. Like,
And then
wait
I
a
don't
minute.
like her.
Wait a minute. No, she's terrible.
Yeah.
How can she do that? How can someone be so selfish? And then, okay, she's sympathetic. And I think it's masterful. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I had a little bit different take. You mentioned the scene where she's running to meet her new, person that she's going to have a relationship with, and everything else is standing still. That really kind of threw me for a loop. I mean, it's a little cheesy. I certainly wasn't expecting it, but to me, I thought that was a moment where she was saying to herself, nothing else matters. I don't care what anybody else thinks. I'm just going to go and start this relationship with this new guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's where the decision was made.
And the filming of the scene of that, whether no matter how you interpret that, kind of reminded me a little bit of La La Land.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah. So it's just one of the the
good.
little quirks that happen in this film that kind of throw you off guard.
Yeah.
But I want to just get a shout out to the Palace Theater in Sun Prairie for showing this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think as we speak, it's still playing there. I think it's going to continue to play there. There is an audience for these movies. I mean, it may not be a huge audience like the big blockbusters, but I really appreciated the Palace showing this, especially, because it is nominated for Best International Film.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, trying to find where you can see those movies.
Trying to track those down
It's
is
pretty
tough.
difficult, yeah.
I agree. What do you end up giving The Worst Person in the World?
I gave it, now I'm thinking maybe I should have gave it more. I gave it 4 stars.
Okay.
As I said, there were some chapters that didn't quite work for me, but,
Strong score.
fantastic performance from this actress, Renata Reinsva. I hope I can see her in more films in the future.
Looking out for her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gave it 4.5. It's a great film. It's really, really enjoyable, well deserving of everything that's being said about it. So go check it out. Go to the theater and see it. I mean, it's a great one. Just sitting there, a little hidden gem.
Don't get scared by the subtitles.
No, do not.
No.
All right, let's take a look real quick at what is coming soon. The weekend of March 4th, I have 3 movies coming out. The first one is the big new film from DC. It's The Batman. Robert Pattinson in Under the Cowl, a film that I'm really, if you watch the episode I did with Dan Presser a couple weeks ago, one of my more anticipated films of the year. Really intrigued by The Batman. We also have, speaking of foreign films that are nominated for awards, Drive My Car will be coming out on Amazon Prime. It is a Japanese film nominated for 4 Oscars, including Best Picture and Director. A drama about loss from director Hamaguchi, who also directed Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, which was one of the better movies that came out last year as well. Really intrigued by this. And then lastly, a film called Fresh, which is a comedy horror starring Sebastian Stan and Daisy Edgar Jones, where dating is tough, especially when one of you is a cannibal. It's coming out March 4th. Steve's giving his opinion on it. Before we go any further, though, to echo what Steve just said, we want to thank the Palace here in Sun Prairie Marcus Theaters. Thank you for sponsoring this program, showing these shows. We always appreciate going and sitting in a Dream Lounger, piling in as much popcorn as we can over a 3-day span. And we love having you as a part of this. So thank you again. Next week, I'm going to be talking about films such as Butter, Studio 666, that's the Foo Fighters horror film, and Cyrano with Peter Dinklage. I'll be joined by Jeff Robbins once again for all of this action. Stay tuned for that. But thank you again for joining me.
Thank you.
Watching some fun films. Every once in a while, we get some good ones in here.
Yep. No, I had fun.
Look forward to having you back on soon to talk about some Oscars. But until next week, I'm Jamison.
And I'm Steve.
Thanks for watching.